We're going to take a look at how to get and manipulate user input in Java. I'm using PyCharm here, and I'm going to create a new project that I'll call Module 2. Within that module, I'll create a file for my program. Remember that we want to follow good naming rules and call this something that describes what it does. So Module 2 assignment isn't great, but input demo is pretty good. I'll put a py extension before I hit create. And once I've created the file, I'm going to want a comment block at the top following whatever template your instructor requires, or just describing the program. This program is going to prompt the user to enter the name of an artist or band they want to see, a total budget, and a price for a single ticket to that concert. It'll then calculate how many tickets the user can afford to buy. So I'll start by creating a variable called artist name, and to this point we've just assigned a string value to our variables, like the Killers. But I don't want the artist to be the Killers every time I run the program. I want the user to give me that information. So instead of this value, what we might call a literal value or a hard-coded value, I'm going to call the input function. This will get input from the user and, since this is part of an assignment statement, put that user's input into our variable. When I run this, the program seems to just hang up. But if I type something and hit enter, the program stops running. What's happening is that first line of the program is just telling Python to get some input, but we haven't given the user any directions. It's just putting whatever they happen to enter into our variable. We'll confirm that by skipping a few lines and outputting that variable's value. And now we can see that, yes, whatever the user enters is being stored in the artist name variable, and we can output that to confirm it. It works fine if you happen to know what you're supposed to do, but obviously we need to give the user some directions. Above that variable initialization, I'm just going to add a print statement that asks for the artist's name. This works just fine. It puts the cursor on the next line, which is fine, but not really what I want. So I'll go back to my print statement and use the end parameter to keep that cursor on the line. Again, it works, but it does jam that text right onto the end, which I don't love, so I can fix that by just adding a space in my prompt. And now we're off to a good start. Next up is the user's budget. Now, because prompting the user and getting input is a really common task in programming, the smart people who developed Python gave us the ability to do both of those tasks in one line of code. I'll still need a variable for this, so I'll create budget, and again I'll take the input as part of my assignment statement. But instead of using print to output a prompt or directions, I can just put that right inside the parentheses of this input function call. And I'll remember to add my space at the end. Notice that we don't have to include the end parameter here. Python keeps the cursor on that line while it gets the user's input. Testing this actually doesn't do much good unless I output that variable value as well, so I'll modify my print statement to use interpolation with both variables. Be sure to put the F at the beginning, which is easy to forget. I can even put a $sign in front of the budget. This is a good chance to point out that Python does have some fancy little tricks for making our output look good. If I'm displaying currency, for example, I really want that $sign and 2 decimal places, and Python does have a way to do that. We're not going to worry about that for now, since we've got enough stuff to worry about as new programmers. This seems to work just fine, so I'll go ahead and prompt the user for the last piece of information we need, which is the ticket price. I'll add a second print statement with interpolation to output this. I haven't made a calculation yet, so I'll just put X as a placeholder. We do need to make a calculation for this, the budget divided by the ticket price. So let's create a variable called num tickets for that, and I'll just use a division operation. There's a problem though, because the input function returns a string, and you can't divide with strings. So when I run this and I type in some numbers, the program actually crashes. We need to convert these strings to numbers, and we have a couple different places we can do that. If I want to make the budget variable into a float, I can just use the float function and put the value or variable to convert in the parentheses. I can do that right here in the division operation, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But since budget is a number and should always be treated as one, we might as well just convert it right when we create it. So I'll delete the float from here, and I'll put it right up here with the input statement. This now tells Python to prompt the user and get their input, and then immediately convert that input into a float. There's a similar function called int, that will convert to a whole number, but float makes sense when we're talking about budget and ticket prices, since they can have dollars and cents. So I'll also convert ticket price to float. And now my division operation should work without crashing. So let's replace the X with a reference to num tickets and try it out. This works pretty well, but obviously we can't buy fractions of tickets. The number of tickets needs to be a whole number or integer. The division operation, which we also call float division, will always return a number with a decimal value. It'll always return a float, even if those numbers divide evenly. If we want to get a whole number, we use the floor division operator, which is 2 slashes. Let's try that. That works out well. It seems to have rounded down to the correct number of tickets. But actually, rounding is not quite the right word for this, because it's not like the rounding we do in our math class. It's really just chopping off everything after that decimal point. It drops the number down to the next lowest whole number. Now, I'm going to use code comments to label the parts of this program. First, we initialize our variables and/or get user input. Then we process that data or do our calculations. Finally, we output the results. For the time being, this is a really good way to organize all your programs while we get the hang of how these things work. And another idea to take away here is how we worked on one piece at a time and focused on getting that working before moving on. Beginners often try to write the whole program at once, and then they have a tough time debugging and figuring out where things went wrong. If this program needs more functionality, I can just keep adding that on. For example, I can calculate the total cost of the tickets and then subtract that from the budget to show how much the user has left. Getting user input and converting that into numeric data is a really common skill that we'll use in many of our programs going forward. So be sure to take a few minutes to write some simple programs using this and get the hang of it.